Welcome to the history of the sleeping legend Thomas Aquinas, a mind shaped by faith, reason, and the pursuit of timeless truth. As you listen, allow your mind to slow. Let the lessons settle naturally, without effort. There is nothing you need to remember, only to absorb. Listen to the end, and allow the wisdom to unfold quietly within you. Relax and enjoy. In 1225, a child was born in Roccaseca, a small town in central Italy. The family was noble, connected to local political power. Thomas Aquinas entered a world of privilege, but would choose a different path than his family expected. From his earliest years, Thomas showed unusual devotion to spiritual matters. While other noble children focused on military training or political preparation, young Thomas asked questions about God, existence, and the nature of reality. His family sent him to the Abbey of Monte Cassino at age 5, a common practice for noble families, dedicating a son to religious life. There, surrounded by monks following ancient rhythms of prayer and study, Thomas absorbed both religious devotion and intellectual curiosity. The monastery provided an education unusual for the time. Thomas learned Latin, studied scripture, and encountered philosophical texts preserved by generations of monks. The quiet discipline of monastic life shaped his character, patient, methodical, devoted to understanding. At 14, he moved to the University of Naples, one of Europe's emerging centers of learning. There, he encountered Aristotle's philosophy, recently rediscovered through Arabic translations. This encounter would shape his life's work, integrating Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. Against his family's wishes, Thomas joined the Dominican order around age 19. The Dominicans were a relatively new religious order, founded just decades earlier, emphasizing both contemplation and active teaching. They valued intellectual rigor alongside spiritual devotion. His family strongly opposed this choice. They wanted Thomas to become a Benedictine abbot, a position offering wealth and influence. The Dominicans, by contrast, took vows of poverty and focused on preaching and teaching. His family even imprisoned him briefly, trying to change his mind. But Thomas remained committed. Something in the Dominican emphasis on learning and teaching resonated deeply with his nature. He saw no contradiction between intellectual pursuit and spiritual devotion. For him, understanding truth through reason and faith was itself a form of worship. Picture young Thomas in those early years, quiet, thoughtful, already showing the patient determination that would characterize his mature work. Like a seed planted in fertile soil, his curiosity and devotion were beginning their slow, steady growth. Thomas developed a fundamental conviction that would guide his entire intellectual project. Faith and reason are not enemies, but companions. Both are valid paths to truth, each illuminating different aspects of reality. This was not the obvious position it might seem. Some theologians of his time distrusted philosophy and reason, seeing them as threats to faith. They worried that too much reliance on human thinking would undermine divine revelation and church authority. Others went the opposite direction, suggesting reason alone sufficed for understanding everything important. They saw faith as unnecessary once you had philosophy and logical argument. Thomas rejected both extremes. He argued that human reason can discover genuine truths about the world and even about God. Through observation, logic, and philosophical analysis, humans can understand natural laws, moral principles, and certain truths about the divine. But reason has limits. Some truths, the Trinity, the Incarnation, specific aspects of God's nature, exceed what unaided reason can grasp. These require divine revelation, accessible through faith and scripture. Think of it this way. Reason is like a lantern you carry, illuminating the path ahead within its limited radius. Faith is like sunlight streaming through trees, revealing the broader landscape. Both help you navigate. Neither makes the other unnecessary. This integration of philosophy and theology became Thomas's great project. He studied Aristotle intensively, the Greek philosopher who emphasized observation, logic, and systematic reasoning. Then he showed how Aristotelian insights could enrich Christian theology without contradicting it. This was delicate work. Some church authorities viewed Aristotle with suspicion. His works had been preserved primarily by Muslim and Jewish scholars, making them seem foreign or dangerous. Some of his ideas seemed to conflict with Christian teaching. Thomas carefully distinguished what in Aristotle was philosophically sound from what contradicted Christian revelation. He adopted Aristotelian logic, metaphysics, and ethics while modifying or rejecting elements incompatible with faith. The result was a comprehensive synthesis, a unified vision, showing how philosophical reason and religious faith work together toward understanding truth. This synthesis shaped Catholic intellectual tradition for centuries and continues influencing Christian philosophy today. Picture Thomas in a monastery study, surrounded by manuscripts, Aristotle, Augustine, Scripture, earlier theologians, patiently working through complex arguments, seeking harmony between sources, building a coherent framework, brick by brick. The work required years of sustained concentration, but Thomas had the temperament for it. Among Thomas's most famous contributions are his 5 ways, 5 rational arguments for God's existence. These arguments attempt to demonstrate through logic and observation, not faith alone, that God must exist. The first way concerns motion. Everything in motion was set in motion by something else. This ball moves because you kicked it. You kicked it because muscles contracted. Muscles contracted because of neural signals. But this chain cannot extend infinitely backward. Eventually, there must be a first mover, something that initiates motion without itself being moved. Thomas identifies this unmoved mover as God. The second way examines causation. Every effect has a cause. This chair exists because someone built it. The builder exists because of parents. Parents exist because of their parents. But again, infinite regress is impossible. There must be a first cause, something that causes without itself being caused. This uncaused cause is God. The third way addresses contingency. Most things that exist could have not existed. You could have not been born. This tree could have not grown. These are contingent beings, possible, but not necessary. But if everything were merely contingent, at some point nothing would have existed, and nothing could have come from nothing. Therefore, something must exist necessarily, something whose existence is not contingent, but required. This necessary being is God. The fourth way considers degrees of perfection. Things exhibit varying degrees of goodness, truth, nobility. Some actions are better than others. Some people are wiser than others. But these comparative judgments imply a maximum, a standard of perfection against which everything else is measured. This ultimate perfection is God. The fifth way examines design and purpose. Natural things lacking intelligence nevertheless act toward ends. Acorns grow into oak trees, not randomly into anything. Eyes develop for seeing. This purposeful order suggests a guiding intelligence directing nature toward its ends. This intelligent designer is God. These arguments have been debated for centuries. Philosophers have raised objections to each one. But Thomas's point was showing that belief in God is rationally defensible, not just a matter of blind faith, but supported by logical argument from observable facts. Consider the first way, the argument from motion. Imagine watching a clock's mechanisms. Gears turn, springs unwind, hands move. Everything moves because something else moves it, even if you don't see the clockmaker. The ordered motion suggests intelligent design and an original source of movement. Thomas wasn't trying to force anyone to believe. He was showing that faith and reason align, that believing in God is philosophically coherent, not irrational. For those already believing, these arguments provided intellectual foundation. For doubters, they offered rational grounds for reconsidering. Thomas devoted considerable thought to questions about human nature and how to live well. Building on Aristotle's ethics, he developed a comprehensive vision of virtue and moral life. Virtues, for Thomas, are stable character traits, habits of thought, feeling, and action that enable human flourishing. They are not occasional good deeds, but consistent dispositions shaping how you characteristically respond to situations. Think of virtues as stones carefully laid along a path. Each stone, each virtuous habit, makes the journey more stable and directed. Without them, you stumble through life reactively, driven by impulse and circumstance. With them, you walk with purpose and grace. Virtues develop through practice. You become honest by repeatedly telling truth, even when lying would be easier. You become courageous by facing fears when necessary. You become generous by habitually giving when you could keep. This means virtue requires time and repetition. You don't become virtuous by understanding virtue intellectually or by occasionally doing good. You become virtuous through sustained practice that gradually reshapes character until good action becomes natural. Thomas distinguished moral virtues, those governing action and emotion, from intellectual virtues, those perfecting understanding. Both matter for complete human flourishing. The moral virtues include courage, temperance, justice, and prudence. These shape how you act in the world, how you handle fear, pleasure, relationships with others, and practical decisions. Intellectual virtues include understanding, knowledge, and wisdom. These perfect the mind's grasp of truth, both practical truth about how to live and theoretical truth about reality's nature. For Thomas, virtue wasn't just about following rules or avoiding sin. It was about becoming fully human, actualizing the potential inherent in human nature through excellent activity, sustained over a lifetime. This perspective makes ethics deeply practical. It's not mainly about dramatic moral dilemmas, but about daily choices that gradually form character. Small acts of patience, honesty, kindness, courage, repeated consistently, transform who you are. Consider your own habits. What patterns characterize your responses to frustration, to pleasure, to other people's needs? These patterns constitute your character, for better or worse. Virtue ethics focuses on gradually reshaping these patterns toward excellence. For Thomas, ethics isn't ultimately about following rules or even developing virtue for its own sake. It's about achieving the highest good, what he called beatitudo, often translated as happiness or blessedness. But Thomas's concept of happiness differs from modern notions. He's not talking about pleasant feelings or satisfaction of desires. He means the fulfillment of human nature's deepest potential, what humans are ultimately for. Following Aristotle, Thomas argued that everything has a natural end or purpose. Acorns are for becoming oak trees. Eyes are for seeing. Human beings, with their capacity for understanding and relationship with the divine, are ultimately for union with God. This union isn't just for afterlife. It begins in this life, through growing understanding of and relationship with God. Every moral action, every virtuous choice, every movement toward truth contributes to this ultimate end. Think of life as a river flowing toward the sea. Every tributary, every small stream, feeds into the greater movement. Similarly, your daily choices, how you treat others, how you handle challenges, what you pursue, either contribute to or distract from your ultimate fulfillment. This gives profound meaning to ordinary moral life. You're not just following rules or avoiding punishment. You're participating in a journey toward complete fulfillment, actualizing what it means to be human in the fullest sense. Thomas recognized that different people might pursue this end with varying degrees of consciousness and success. Someone might live virtuously without explicitly thinking about union with God. But the underlying structure remains. Human fulfillment comes through aligning life with its ultimate purpose. This teleological ethics oriented toward ends, contrasts with purely duty-based or consequentialist approaches. It's not mainly about obligation or results, but about becoming what you're meant to be through excellent activity sustained over time. The practical implication: your daily choices matter, not just for immediate consequences, but for who they're making you become. Each choice is a small step, either toward or away from fulfillment. Over time, these steps accumulate into a direction, toward integration and flourishing, or toward fragmentation and frustration. Picture a calm river winding through a valley, fed by countless smaller streams. Each branch contributes to the whole. Similarly, your choices, relationships, and actions, however small, feed into the larger pattern of your life, creating momentum toward fulfillment or stagnation. Thomas valued learning, study, and intellectual development as intrinsically important activities. Understanding truth was, for him, both a means to other goods and a good in itself, part of what makes human life distinctively human. He spent much of his life in universities, Paris, Cologne, Rome, centers of medieval learning, where scholars debated philosophy and theology. He was both student and teacher, always learning while helping others understand. His great achievement was synthesizing Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. Before Thomas, many church authorities viewed Aristotle suspiciously. His emphasis on observation and reason, his focus on earthly reality rather than purely spiritual matters, seemed potentially threatening to faith. Thomas showed they could coexist productively. Aristotle's logic could clarify theological arguments. His metaphysics could illuminate God's nature. His ethics could enrich Christian moral teaching. Reason and faith weren't competing, but complementary sources of truth. This synthesis required immense learning. Thomas mastered Aristotle's complete works, Augustine's Theology, Scripture, earlier theologians, Islamic and Jewish philosophy. He could engage arguments in multiple traditions, finding connections and resolving apparent contradictions. Think of reason as a compass, and faith as a map. The compass shows direction through careful observation, and logic. The map, drawn from revelation, shows the larger terrain. Together, they guide you more effectively than either alone. Thomas's respect for learning extended beyond theology to natural philosophy, what we'd call science. He believed studying the natural world reveals God's creative wisdom. Understanding how nature works is itself a form of worship, appreciating the divine intelligence manifest in creation. This attitude toward learning was patient and humble. Thomas recognized that understanding develops gradually through sustained effort. Quick conclusions based on insufficient evidence lead to error. True wisdom requires time, careful study, and willingness to revise understanding when new insights emerge. Picture Thomas in a monastery library, surrounded by manuscripts in flickering candlelight, carefully reading arguments, comparing sources, taking notes, thinking through implications. This patient work, repeated daily for decades, gradually built the comprehensive system of thought he's famous for. Thomas structured much of his teaching through questions. His masterwork, the Summa Theologica, is organized as a series of questions and answers, hundreds of them, systematically exploring every major theological and philosophical topic. Each question follows a pattern. First, Thomas presents objections, arguments against the position he'll ultimately defend. He states these objections fairly and forcefully, giving them their due weight. Then he presents authorities supporting his view. Then comes his own reasoned response, carefully argued. Finally, he addresses each objection, showing why it fails or can be reconciled with his position. This method had several virtues. It forced Thomas to engage opposing views seriously, not just dismiss them. It showed readers multiple perspectives on each question. It demonstrated that faith doesn't require ignoring difficult objections, but can address them rationally. The questioning approach also reflects intellectual humility. Thomas didn't claim to have all answers immediately obvious. Complex questions require careful examination from multiple angles. Understanding develops through sustained inquiry, not instant certainty. Think of knowledge as a journey through a labyrinth. Questions are the turns guiding you forward. Each question opens new paths, reveals new perspectives, gradually maps the territory. Without questions, you wander aimlessly. With them, even the maze becomes navigable. This approach to learning remains valuable today. In a world of quick takes and confident assertions, Thomas's patient questioning offers an alternative. Slow down. Consider objections seriously. Examine arguments carefully. Build understanding gradually, through sustained inquiry. The method also has a spiritual dimension. For Thomas, asking questions about God, existence, and purpose was itself a form of devotion. Not presuming to have God completely figured out, but humbly seeking greater understanding. This intellectual humility complements faith. Picture walking through a garden maze, taking your time at each turn. Some paths lead forward, others to dead ends. But each choice teaches something, gradually mapping the whole. Similarly, patient questioning maps the terrain of truth, revealing connections and clarifying understanding. While Thomas valued reason highly, he didn't ignore emotions. He recognized that feelings play crucial roles in moral life and human flourishing. The question isn't whether to have emotions, but how to integrate them appropriately with reason and virtue. Thomas distinguished emotions, what he called passions, into categories. Some emotions move us toward things: love, desire, hope, joy. Others move us away: hatred, aversion, fear, sadness. Still others arise from encountering good or evil: anger, courage. These emotions aren't inherently good or bad. They're natural responses to perceived goods and evils. The moral question concerns whether the emotion is appropriate to its object, and whether it's properly governed by reason. Appropriate emotions reinforce virtue. Compassion for suffering motivates helping others. Righteous anger at injustice spurs corrective action. Love of truth drives intellectual inquiry. Fear of danger enables appropriate caution. Inappropriate emotions undermine flourishing. Excessive anger leads to destructive behavior. Disordered desire enslaves you to unworthy objects. Irrational fear prevents necessary action. The goal isn't eliminating emotion, but cultivating appropriate emotional responses. This cultivation happens through the same process as developing virtue: repeated practice. You train emotional responses by repeatedly directing them appropriately. Over time, appropriate emotional reactions become characteristic, part of your formed character. Think of emotions as winds that can sway you. Gentle awareness of these winds lets you adjust course, using favorable ones, while compensating for problematic ones. Without this awareness, winds blow you wherever they will. With it, you navigate skillfully. Thomas also valued reflection, the practice of thinking carefully about your life, choices, and direction. In monastic tradition, he practiced regular examination of conscience, reviewing actions, and noting where he fell short of ideals. This reflective practice serves multiple purposes. It reveals patterns in your behavior that might otherwise escape notice. It provides opportunity to course correct before small problems become large ones. It deepens self-understanding and clarifies values. Picture a soft breeze moving across water, creating gentle ripples. Your emotions are like this breeze, sometimes strong, sometimes subtle, always present. With calm awareness, you can notice these movements without being overwhelmed by them, responding appropriately rather than reactively. Thomas died in 1274, at age 49, relatively young by any standard. He left behind an enormous body of work, comprehensive theological summaries, biblical commentaries, philosophical treatises, responses to questions from correspondents. His immediate influence was significant, but also controversial. Some of his positions faced opposition from church authorities, who distrusted Aristotelian philosophy. Parts of his teaching were temporarily condemned after his death, though this was later reversed. Within decades, however, Thomas's synthesis of faith and reason became foundational for Catholic intellectual tradition. His thought shaped theological education, moral theology, and philosophical reflection. He was canonized as a saint and eventually declared a doctor of the Church. His influence extended beyond Catholic contexts. Protestant reformers engaged his arguments even when disagreeing. Islamic and Jewish scholars found points of contact with his philosophical theology. His natural law theory influenced legal philosophy. His virtue ethics shaped moral discourse. In modern times, multiple revivals of Thomistic philosophy have occurred. Pope Leo XIII, in the late 1800s, promoted renewed study of Thomas's works. 20th-century philosophers found resources in his thought for addressing contemporary problems. Today, Thomas remains influential in multiple fields. Ethicists engage his virtue theory. Philosophers debate his metaphysics and philosophy of mind. Theologians draw on his systematic approach. Legal theorists reference his natural law tradition. Think of his wisdom as a lighthouse standing through centuries, its light sweeping across changing seas. Different generations see different aspects of his thought as relevant, but the fundamental insights continue illuminating important questions. Beyond specific doctrines, Thomas exemplifies a way of approaching intellectual work. Patient, systematic, charitable to opposing views, committed to finding truth through both reason and faith. This approach remains valuable, regardless of whether you accept his particular conclusions. Picture that lighthouse on a rocky coast, its light rotating steadily. Ships navigate by it through fog and storm, each generation of travelers benefiting from its steady guidance. Similarly, Thomas's thought continues offering orientation for those navigating questions about faith, reason, ethics, and human purpose. Let's explore more deeply Thomas's conviction that faith and reason work together harmoniously. This was his central insight, the key that unlocked his comprehensive philosophical and theological vision. Thomas argued that both faith and reason come ultimately from God. God created human rational capacities and gave divine revelation. Since both have the same source, they cannot genuinely contradict, though they might seem to be, from a limited human perspective. Reason operates through observation, logic, and inference. It starts with what's accessible to human experience and understanding. Through careful thinking, reason can discover truths about the natural world, about logic, about ethics, even about God's existence and certain aspects of divine nature. Faith operates through revelation, accepted on divine authority. It provides knowledge that exceeds what unaided reason could grasp, knowledge about God's inner nature, about salvation, about specific historical events involving divine action. The relationship is complementary, not competitive. Reason provides foundation, establishing God's existence, showing religious belief is rational, clarifying moral principles accessible to human understanding. Faith builds on this foundation, revealing specific truths about God, explaining salvation, giving definite content to religious life. Think of reason as a lantern in a dark room, illuminating what's immediately around you through its limited but genuine light. Faith is like sunlight streaming through windows, revealing the larger space and showing how everything connects to what lies beyond the room. Some truths are accessible to reason alone: that humans should treat others fairly, that lying is generally wrong, that the universe requires explanation. These can be discovered through philosophical reflection without revelation. Other truths require revelation: that God is triune, that the divine became incarnate, that specific forms of worship and practice please God. These exceed what reason alone could determine. They depend on God's self-disclosure through scriptures and church tradition. Still, other truths can be approached both ways. God's existence can be demonstrated philosophically, as in the 5 ways, but is also revealed in Scripture. Human dignity can be argued philosophically, but is also confirmed by revelation. The 2 paths converge. This framework had practical implications. It meant Christians should take philosophy seriously, not dismiss it as threatening to faith. It meant philosophers should remain open to revelation, not assume reason alone provides complete understanding. It encouraged dialogue between faith traditions and between religious and secular thinkers. Thomas practiced this in his own work. He engaged seriously with non-Christian philosophers: Aristotle, Avicenna, Averroes, Maimonides, learning from their insights while maintaining Christian commitments. He showed how philosophical tools could clarify theological debates. He demonstrated that faith doesn't require intellectual suicide. Picture walking through a dimly lit corridor with a lantern. You can see the immediate path, enough to avoid obstacles and move forward. Then you notice sunlight filtering through windows ahead, revealing the corridor opens into a vast light-filled space. The lantern remains useful, but sunlight transforms your understanding of where you are and where you're heading. Thomas developed an influential theory of natural law, moral principles accessible to human reason by reflecting on human nature and its requirements for flourishing. The concept starts with the idea that everything has a nature, a characteristic way of being and acting that defines what it is. Acorns have oak tree nature. Birds have bird nature. Humans have human nature. From understanding a thing's nature, you can derive its proper ends or purposes. What is it for? What fulfills it? A knife's purpose involves cutting. An eye's purpose involves seeing. What about human beings? Thomas argued that humans are naturally rational, social, and oriented toward understanding truth and living in relationships. These characteristics define human nature and point toward human flourishing. Natural law consists of moral principles following from human nature. Since humans are social, principles governing social life: don't harm others, keep promises, respect property, follow from our nature. Since humans seek truth, principles supporting truthfulness and learning follow naturally. These principles aren't arbitrary divine commands or mere cultural conventions. They're built into what we are, discoverable by reflecting carefully on human nature and its requirements for thriving. This gives morality a rational foundation independent of revelation. Even someone who doesn't accept Scripture can recognize these principles by careful thought about human nature. Natural law provides common ground for moral discourse across cultural and religious differences. Think of life as having a built-in rhythm, like seasons following their natural order. By observing this rhythm carefully, noticing what makes humans flourish versus what makes them deteriorate, you discover principles for living well. Spring naturally follows winter. Growth follows planting. Flourishing follows virtuous living. Thomas didn't claim natural law provides answers to every specific moral question. Cultural context, circumstances, and prudent judgment matter for application. But he argued it establishes core principles that any adequate ethics must acknowledge. The theory also connects to Thomas's broader metaphysics. God creates human nature with its characteristic ends. Natural law reflects divine wisdom about what conduces to human flourishing. Following natural law aligns us with both our created nature and divine intentions. This framework influenced legal and political philosophy for centuries. The idea that moral principles precede and constrain positive law, that unjust laws aren't truly laws, shaped constitutional thinking and human rights theory. Picture seasons turning in their ancient pattern. Spring's warmth follows winter's cold, not arbitrarily, but according to natural order, built into how the world works. Similarly, moral principles follow from human nature's structure, discoverable through patient observation and reflection. Thomas, following earlier philosophical tradition, identified 4 cardinal virtues, virtues on which other moral excellences hinge. These are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Prudence is practical wisdom, the ability to discern right action in particular circumstances. It's not just following rules mechanically, but judging well what this situation requires. Prudence involves both understanding general principles and perceiving specific circumstances accurately. Someone with prudence sees situations clearly, considers relevant factors, deliberates carefully, and chooses appropriately. This requires experience, good judgment, and moral maturity. You develop prudence gradually, through making choices and learning from results. Justice concerns giving others their due, treating people fairly, respecting rights, maintaining proper relationships. Thomas distinguished different types of justice: distributive justice, fair allocation of goods; commutative justice, fairness in exchanges; and legal justice, contributions to common good. Justice requires both recognizing others' legitimate claims and acting on that recognition. It's not just having fair intentions, but following through with appropriate action. Justice also requires institutional structures supporting fair treatment, another reason ethics and politics connect. Fortitude is courage, steadiness in facing difficulty, danger, or suffering. Not recklessness or absence of fear, but appropriate response to genuine threats. Fortitude means neither fleeing when you should stand firm, nor foolishly confronting dangers better avoided. This virtue enables pursuing good, despite obstacles. Many worthwhile goals involve difficulty. Without fortitude, you abandon them at the first challenge. With it, you persist through setbacks toward what truly matters. Temperance is moderation in pleasure, particularly physical pleasures like food, drink, and sex. Not eliminating pleasure, but enjoying it appropriately, neither excessively nor deficiently. Temperance prevents disordered desires from dominating life. Think of these 4 virtues as legs of a table, each supporting the whole, each necessary for stability. Remove any leg, and the structure wobbles. Develop all four, and your moral life stands firm. Prudence guides the others, helping you judge what justice requires in this situation, when fortitude is needed, what temperance demands. Justice ensures you treat others well. Fortitude enables persisting, despite difficulty. Temperance prevents disordered desires from derailing you. Thomas believed these cardinal virtues, while acquirable through practice, are also infused more perfectly by God's grace. Natural virtue developed through practice combines with grace-enhanced virtue for complete flourishing. Picture a table standing steady on four strong legs. It can bear weight, serve its purpose, and remain stable through use. Remove any leg, and it collapses. Similarly, balanced development of all four cardinal virtues provides a stable foundation for moral life. Beyond the cardinal virtues knowable through reason, Thomas identified three theological virtues revealed through faith, hope, and charity. Faith, in Thomas's sense, isn't just intellectual assent to propositions. It's trust in God, acceptance of revealed truth, commitment of your whole self to divine reality. Faith provides orientation for life, shaping how you understand yourself and the world. This doesn't mean blind acceptance without reason. Thomas argued that faith, while surpassing reason, isn't contrary to reason. There are good reasons for trusting divine revelation, and faith provides knowledge that completes what reason begins. Hope is a confident expectation of achieving ultimate good through God's help. Not wishful thinking or vague optimism, but grounded confidence that despite difficulties, obstacles, and your own failings, fulfillment remains possible through divine grace. Hope prevents both presumption, assuming you'll succeed without effort, and despair, giving up entirely. It maintains realistic assessment of difficulties while trusting in resources beyond your own strength. Charity, love in theological sense, is the greatest of virtues. Thomas calls it the form of all virtues, meaning it directs and perfects them all. Charity involves loving God supremely and loving others for God's sake, desiring their true good. This love isn't just emotion, but actively wanting good for others. It manifests in concrete action. Feeding hungry, teaching ignorant, comforting sorrowful, bearing wrongs patiently. Charity unites a person to God and transforms all other virtues. Think of these three virtues as threads weaving together to form a strong cord. Faith provides content and direction. Hope maintains perseverance. Charity motivates and perfects action. Together, they unite human life to divine reality. Unlike cardinal virtues acquired through practice, theological virtues are gifts, infused by God's grace, not merely developed through human effort. They require divine initiative, though human cooperation remains necessary. Thomas saw theological virtues as completing natural moral development. The cardinal virtues make you humanly excellent. Theological virtues orient this excellence toward ultimate divine end, transforming good human life into participation in divine life. Picture threads of light, faith, hope, charity, weaving through your life, connecting everything to something beyond yourself. They illuminate ordinary activities with deeper meaning, transforming practical moral life into movement toward complete fulfillment. Thomas conceived intellectual and spiritual development as a gradual ascent, climbing a ladder step by step, each level building on previous ones. Knowledge begins with sensory experience. You see, hear, touch, taste, smell the physical world. These sensations provide raw material for understanding. Without sensory input, human knowing couldn't begin. From sensory experience, intellect abstracts universal concepts. You see individual trees and grasp treeness, the common nature making them all trees. This abstraction enables conceptual thought and language. With concepts, you can form judgments, connecting or separating concepts to make claims about reality. The tree is oak. Water flows downhill. These judgments can be true or false, corresponding or failing to correspond to reality. From judgments, you develop reasoning, drawing inferences, following logical connections, building systematic understanding. From particular observations, you derive general principles. From established principles, you deduce particular implications. This process moves from concrete, particular experiences toward increasingly abstract universal understanding. At each level, knowledge becomes more general, more explanatory, more comprehensive. The ladder continues upward. From reasoning about natural phenomena, you rise to philosophical reflection on being itself, causation, necessity. From philosophy, you can glimpse truths about divine reality, accessible to reason, God's existence, unity, perfection. But the ladder extends higher still. Beyond what reason alone can reach lies revealed truth. Knowledge God communicates through Scripture, incarnation, and ongoing divine action in history. This requires faith to access, but it builds on and completes natural knowledge. The highest rungs involve mystical union, direct experiential knowledge of God that exceeds both philosophical reasoning and propositional revelation. This is a foretaste of beatific vision, awaiting believers after death. Think of climbing a gentle staircase in a quiet tower. Each step reveals slightly more of the landscape visible through windows. The ground floor shows immediate surroundings. Higher floors reveal broader vistas. The top opens onto a vast panoramic view, previously unimaginable. Thomas's epistemology is optimistic about human capacity, while realistic about limitations. We can know the real truth, starting from sensory experience and climbing toward divine reality. But unaided reason only reaches so far. Revelation and grace enable further ascent. This framework integrated Aristotelian empiricism, knowledge starting from senses, with Christian belief in revealed truth, knowledge coming from God. It showed how natural and supernatural knowledge complement rather than compete. Picture yourself ascending softly through that tower, each floor opening to wider views of distant horizon. The climb takes time and effort, but each step reveals more light, more clarity, a more comprehensive understanding of where you are and where you're heading. Following Aristotle, Thomas emphasized seeking the mean between extremes in moral matters. Virtue typically lies between deficiency and excess, between too little and too much of some quality or action. Courage is the mean between cowardice, too much fear, and recklessness, too little fear. The courageous person feels appropriate fear, neither paralyzed by it nor foolishly ignoring real danger. Temperance is the mean between self-indulgence, excessive pursuit of pleasure, and insensibility, deficient appreciation of legitimate pleasure. The temperate person enjoys pleasures appropriately, without being controlled by them. Generosity is the mean between stinginess, giving too little, and wastefulness, giving too much or imprudently. The generous person gives appropriately, enough to be genuinely helpful, but not so much as to impoverish themselves foolishly. But finding the mean isn't simple mathematics. It's not just the midpoint between extremes. What counts as appropriate varies with circumstances, relationships, stakes involved. This requires judgment, prudence to discern. Sometimes circumstances call for boldness, other times for caution. Sometimes you should give generously, other times hold back. Sometimes strong emotion is appropriate, other times calm restraint. The mean varies with context. This makes virtue complex, requiring developed practical wisdom. You can't just follow rigid rules mechanically. You must judge what this particular situation calls for, considering all relevant factors. Think of tuning a musical instrument. Too much tension breaks the string. Too little produces a weak sound. The right tension, neither too tight nor too loose, produces a beautiful tone. Similarly, finding the meaning in moral matters creates harmony and balance. Thomas added a distinctly Christian element to Aristotelian golden mean. For some matters, particularly in relation to God, there is no excess. You can't love God too much, trust God too completely, desire union with God too intensely. Here, more is always better. This distinguishes theological virtues from moral virtues. For moral virtues governing earthly life, balance and moderation apply. For theological virtues orienting us toward God, passionate intensity is appropriate and encouraged.